In the bustling heart of New York City, where ambition collides with betrayal and love battles against the weight of the past, two souls find themselves on a journey that will test the very limits of their hearts. Serena Cruz, a brilliant designer haunted by her family's tarnished legacy, and Alexander Drake, a powerful CEO struggling to escape the shadow of his father's sins, are drawn together by a love so fierce it threatens to unravel everything they've built. But when secrets buried deep within the walls of a corporate empire come to light, their bond is pushed to the brink. This is not just a story of romance, it's a tale of resilience, redemption, and the courage to fight for what truly matters. For anyone who has ever believed in the power of love to heal, to inspire, and to transform, Serena and Alexander's journey will remind you that even in the darkest moments, hope can shine through. Will their love survive the storm, or will the weight of the past tear them apart? Only one thing is certain: their story will stay with you long after the final page. The city of New York never sleeps, and neither do the ambitions of those who call it home. Beneath the glittering skyline, where towering skyscrapers pierce the clouds, lies a world of power, passion, and secrets. It's a place where dreams are made, but also where legacies are shattered. This is the world of Serena Cruz and Alexander Drake, two individuals from vastly different walks of life, yet destined to collide in ways neither could have foreseen. Serena Cruz had always been a fighter. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Queens, she learned early on that nothing in life would be handed to her. Her father, a once respected financial consultant, had been wrongfully accused of embezzlement years ago, a scandal that destroyed his career and left her family in ruins. Watching her father's downfall taught Serena one thing: the world wasn't fair, but she would carve out her own path, no matter the cost. Now, at 29, Serena was the creative director of Lumina, a cutting-edge fashion brand that had taken the industry by storm. Known for her bold designs and fearless approach to innovation, she had become a rising star in the competitive world of high fashion. But behind her confident exterior, Serena carried the weight of her family's past. Every success she achieved felt like a small victory against the injustice her father had endured. Yet the scars of betrayal lingered. On the other side of the city, Alexander Drake was preparing for another long night. As the CEO of Drake Innovations, a tech fashion conglomerate that dominated the global market, Alexander was no stranger to pressure. At 35, he had inherited the company from his father, Richard Drake, a man whose ruthless business tactics had built an empire but left a trail of enemies in his wake. Alexander had spent years trying to distance himself from his father's shadow, but the weight of the Drake legacy was a constant burden. Alexander was a man of contradictions. To the public, he was the epitome of success, charming, intelligent, and impeccably dressed. But behind closed doors, he wrestled with the moral compromises his family's empire had been built upon. He wanted to believe he could steer the company in a new direction, one that valued integrity over profit, but the ghosts of the past were never far behind. The stage was set for their worlds to collide. That evening, both Serena and Alexander found themselves at the same event, a lavish rooftop gala hosted by the city's elite. The gala was a celebration of innovation and creativity, bringing together the brightest minds in fashion and technology. For Serena, it was an opportunity to showcase Lumina's latest collection and solidify her reputation as a trailblazer. For Alexander, it was just another obligation, a chance to network and maintain appearances. The rooftop was a vision of luxury, with twinkling fairy lights strung across the open-air space and the city skyline serving as a breathtaking backdrop. Guests mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, their laughter and conversation blending into a symphony of sophistication. Serena stood near the edge of the terrace, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. She wore a sleek black dress of her own design, its minimalist elegance a testament to her creative genius. Yet despite the success she exuded, there was a flicker of unease in her gaze, a reminder of the battles she had fought to get here. Alexander entered the gala with his usual air of confidence, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries and handshakes, but his mind was elsewhere. He had grown tired of these events, tired of the endless charade of power and wealth. As he glanced around the room, his eyes landed on Serena, and for a moment, the noise of the gala faded into the background. There was something about her that caught his attention, an intensity in her expression, a quiet strength that set her apart from the rest of the crowd. She wasn't like the others, he realized. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here because she belonged. Intrigued, Alexander made his way toward her. His curiosity piqued. Serena noticed him approaching and straightened her posture, her guard instinctively going up. She had heard of Alexander Drake, of course. Everyone in the industry knew his name. He was a man of power and influence, but also a man whose family's reputation was steeped in controversy. As he reached her, he extended a hand, his smile disarming yet calculated. "Sina Cruz," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "I've heard a lot about you. Your work is impressive." Serena hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand. "Alexander Drake," she replied, her tone polite but guarded. "I could say the same about you." Their conversation began as a polite exchange, but there was an undercurrent of tension, a spark that neither could ignore. As the night went on, they found themselves drawn to each other, their words becoming more candid, their gazes lingering just a little too long. For Serena, Alexander was a puzzle, charming yet enigmatic, a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. For Alexander, Serena was a breath of fresh air, fierce, intelligent, and unapologetically herself. By the end of the evening, neither of them could deny the connection that had formed between them. But as they parted ways, both Serena and Alexander knew that this was only the beginning. Their worlds were about to collide in ways that would change them forever. The rooftop gala was in full swing, a dazzling display of wealth and influence. The city skyline stretched endlessly in the background, its lights twinkling like scattered diamonds against the night sky. The air buzzed with the hum of conversation, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter from the city's elite. It was a night meant to celebrate innovation and creativity, but for Serena Cruz, it was just another battlefield. Serena stood near the edge of the terrace, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. She had always been good at reading people, a skill honed from years of navigating the cutthroat world of fashion. Tonight, she was dressed in one of her own designs, a sleek black dress, with clean lines and subtle metallic accents that caught the light with every movement. It was a statement piece, bold yet understated, much like the woman wearing it. But despite her composed exterior, Serena felt a flicker of unease. She had worked tirelessly to earn her place in this world, but the ghosts of her past were never far behind. As she sipped her champagne, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a deep, confident voice behind her. "Enjoying the view?" Serena turned to find herself face to face with Alexander Drake. Up close, he was even more striking than she had imagined. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to see right through her. There was an air of effortless charm about him, but also something darker, something guarded. Serena had heard plenty about Alexander, his meteoric rise to the top of Drake Innovations, his reputation as a shrewd businessman, and of course, the shadow of his family's controversial legacy. She had no intention of being charmed by him, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made it hard to look away. "The view's not bad," Serena replied coolly, her tone measured, "but I'm guessing you didn't come over here to talk about the skyline." Alexander smiled, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "You're right. I didn't. I came over because I couldn't help but notice you. Serena Cruz, the creative genius behind Lumina. Your work speaks for itself." Serena raised an eyebrow, her guard instinctively going up. Compliments from men like Alexander often came with strings attached. "Flattery won't get you very far, Mr. Drake." "Who said I was trying to get anywhere?" he countered smoothly. "Maybe I'm just here to enjoy the company of someone who doesn't seem impressed by all this." He gestured vaguely to the opulent surroundings, his tone laced with subtle disdain. Serena studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his intentions. There was something disarming about his honesty, something that made her want to lower her defenses, if only for a moment. But she knew better than to let her guard down, especially around someone like Alexander Drake. "Fair enough," she said finally, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "But don't think for a second that I'm not paying attention." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Alexander replied, his smile widening. "You strike me as someone who always pays attention." Their conversation continued, the initial tension between them giving way to a surprising ease. They talked about their work, their ambitions, and the challenges of navigating their respective industries. For Serena, it was refreshing to speak with someone who understood the pressures of success, someone who didn't shy away from the complexities of ambition. For Alexander, Serena was a revelation, a woman who was as intelligent as she was beautiful, someone who challenged him in a way few others ever had. As the night wore on, the crowd around them seemed to fade into the background. They found themselves standing closer, their voices dropping to a more intimate tone. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, a magnetic pull that neither could ignore. And then, in a moment that felt both inevitable and unexpected, Alexander leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was brief but electric, a spark that ignited something deep within both of them. For Serena, it was a moment of vulnerability, a crack in the armor she had spent years building. For Alexander, it was a risk, a step into uncharted territory. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their eyes locked in a silent exchange. "That was unexpected," Serena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes the best things are," Alexander replied, his tone soft but certain. But even as they stood there, the weight of reality began to settle over them. Serena couldn't ignore the voice in the back of her mind, warning her of the dangers of getting involved with someone like Alexander, and Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, as perfect as it was, would come with consequences. As the gala began to wind down, they parted ways, each lost in their own thoughts. But neither of them could deny that something had shifted, that their lives had been irrevocably changed by that one unexpected kiss. The night after the gala, Serena Cruz found herself replaying the kiss in her mind. It wasn't just the kiss itself. It was the way Alexander Drake had looked at her, as if she were the only person in the room. She had spent years building walls around her heart, but in that fleeting moment, she had felt them begin to crack. Still, she reminded herself, Alexander was dangerous territory. He was a man of power, a man whose family's legacy was steeped in controversy. Getting involved with him could jeopardize everything she had worked so hard to achieve. But despite her best efforts to push him from her mind, Alexander wasn't going anywhere. The very next day, a bouquet of white orchids, her favorite flowers, arrived at her office, accompanied by a handwritten note, "For the woman who made last night unforgettable, A.D." Serena stared at the note for a long moment, her emotions a mix of surprise, flattery, and apprehension. She wasn't used to being pursued, especially not by someone like Alexander, but there was something about his boldness, his confidence, that intrigued her. Against her better judgment, she found herself smiling. Later that evening, as she was leaving the Lumina office, she spotted Alexander waiting for her outside. He leaned casually against a sleek black car, his hands in his pockets and a small, knowing smile on his face. The sight of him sent a jolt through her, but she quickly composed herself. "Stalking me now, Mr. Drake?" she asked, her tone teasing but guarded. "Not stalking," he replied smoothly, "just persistent. I was hoping you'd let me take you to dinner." Serena hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, to keep her distance, but there was a part of her, a part she hadn't listened to in a long time, that wanted to say yes. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. "Fine, but just dinner." Alexander's smile widened. "Just dinner," he agreed, though the glint in his eyes suggested he had other plans. The restaurant Alexander chose was intimate and elegant, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Candlelight flickered on the tables and soft jazz played in the background. It was the kind of place that felt like a world away from the chaos of New York, a place where time seemed to slow down. As they sat across from each other, Serena found herself relaxing in his presence. Alexander was easy to talk to, his charm disarming but not overbearing. They spoke about their work, their passions, and their dreams. For the first time in a long time, Serena felt like someone truly saw her, not just the successful creative director, but the woman behind the title. But as the evening went on, the conversation took a more personal turn. Alexander opened up about his struggles with his family's legacy, about the pressure to live up to his father's expectations while trying to forge his own path. Serena listened intently, her heart softening as she saw the vulnerability beneath his polished exterior. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove that I'm not my father," Alexander admitted, his voice low, "but sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, I'll always be defined by his mistakes." Serena reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. "You're not your father, Alexander," she said softly. "You have the power to define your own legacy. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Her words seemed to strike a chord with him, and for a moment they simply sat there, the connection between them deepening. It was a moment of quiet intimacy, a moment that felt both fragile and powerful. After dinner, Alexander insisted on driving Serena home. As they pulled up outside her apartment, he turned to her, his expression serious. "I know this is complicated," he said, "but I can't stop thinking about you, Serena. I don't want to." Serena's heart raced at his words, but she forced herself to stay grounded. Whatever this is, it's risky," she said. "You know that, right?" "I know," Alexander replied, "but some risks are worth taking." Before she could respond, he leaned in and kissed her. This time the kiss was slower, deeper, and filled with a passion that left her breathless. It was a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities, of a connection that neither of them could deny. When they finally pulled apart, Serena looked into his eyes and saw the same fire that burned within her. She knew this was dangerous, that getting involved with Alexander could complicate her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But in that moment, she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt alive. As she stepped out of the car and walked toward her apartment, Serena couldn't help but smile. She didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time she was willing to find out. The days following her deepening connection with Alexander Drake were a whirlwind for Serena Cruz. By day, she threw herself into her work at Lumina, finalizing designs for an upcoming collection that would debut at New York Fashion Week. By night, her thoughts were consumed by Alexander, the way he made her feel seen, the way his touch lingered in her memory. But as much as she wanted to let herself fall, there was a nagging voice in the back of her mind, warning her that this was too good to be true. That voice grew louder one evening as Serena sat in her small but stylish apartment, flipping through an old box of family keepsakes. She had been searching for inspiration for her next collection, but instead, she stumbled upon a folder she hadn't opened in years. Inside were newspaper clippings, court documents, and handwritten notes, remnants of the scandal that had destroyed her father's career. Her father, Miguel Cruz, had been a respected financial consultant, known for his integrity and sharp mind, but years ago he had been accused of embezzling funds from one of his wealthiest clients, a scandal that had not only ruined his reputation, but also sent him to prison. Serena had been just a teenager at the time, but she remembered the shame, the whispers, and the way her family had been ostracized. Her father had always maintained his innocence, but the evidence against him had been damning. As Serena sifted through the documents, her heart sank. One name kept appearing over and over again: Richard Drake, Alexander's father. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Richard Drake had been the CEO of Drake Innovations at the time, and one of Miguel Cruz's most prominent clients. According to the documents, it was Richard who had accused Miguel of embezzlement, providing the evidence that had sealed his fate. But Serena's father had always claimed that he had been framed, that the real crime had been committed by someone within the Drake Empire. Serena's hands trembled as she pieced it together. The man she was falling for, the man who had kissed her with such passion and tenderness, was the son of the man who had destroyed her family. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her reeling. The next day, Serena couldn't focus. Her mind was a storm of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion. She wanted to confront Alexander, to demand answers, but she also knew she needed to tread carefully. If she accused him without proof, it could backfire. And yet the thought of continuing their relationship without addressing the truth felt impossible. That evening, Alexander called her. His voice was warm, filled with the easy charm that had drawn her to him in the first place. "I was hoping I could see you tonight," he said. "There's something about you, Serena. I can't stay away." Serena hesitated, her heart torn. She wanted to see him, to lose herself in the way he made her feel, but she couldn't ignore the shadow of his father's actions looming over them. Finally, she agreed. "Come over," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "We need to talk." When Alexander arrived at her apartment, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Serena's usual confidence was replaced by a guarded tension, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to find answers to questions she hadn't yet asked. "What's going on?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. Serena took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the folder she had placed on the coffee table. "I need to know the truth, Alexander, about your father, about what he did to mine." Alexander's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Serena opened the folder, spreading the documents across the table. "My father, Miguel Cruz, he was accused of embezzlement years ago, and your father was the one who accused him. But my father always said he was framed, that someone in your family set him up. I need to know if it's true." Alexander stared at the papers, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and Serena's heart sank. She had hoped he would deny it, that he would tell her it was all a misunderstanding, but the silence spoke volumes. Finally, Alexander looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and determination. "Serena, I didn't know about this, I swear. But if what you're saying is true, then I'll find out. I'll get to the bottom of it." Serena wanted to believe him, but the pain of her father's betrayal was too fresh, too raw. "How can I trust you, Alexander? How can I trust that you're not just like him?" Alexander stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Because I'm not my father, Serena. I've spent my whole life trying to undo the damage he caused, trying to build something better. And if he did this, if he hurt your family, then I'll make it right. I promise you." Serena searched his face, looking for any sign of deception, but all she saw was sincerity. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Alexander was different. But the road ahead was uncertain, and the weight of the past loomed heavy over them both. That night, after Alexander left, Serena sat alone in her apartment, staring at the documents spread across the table. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he would uncover the truth, but she also knew that the answers they found could change everything. As she closed the folder and turned off the lights, Serena couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The shadows of the past were closing in, and the choices they made in the days to come would determine whether their love could survive or if it would be consumed by the darkness. The days following Serena's confrontation with Alexander were tense and uncertain. True to his word, Alexander began digging into his father's past, determined to uncover the truth about the accusations against Miguel Cruz. But as he delved deeper, he realized that the answers he sought would not come easily. The Drake Empire was built on secrets, and those secrets were guarded fiercely by people who had everything to lose. Meanwhile, Serena tried to focus on her work at Lumina, but the weight of the situation was impossible to ignore. Her relationship with Alexander had become a delicate balancing act, one moment filled with passion and hope, the next overshadowed by doubt and fear. And as if that weren't enough, a new threat was beginning to emerge, one that neither of them could have anticipated. Enter Marcella Everett, the cunning and ambitious head of public relations for Drake Innovations. Marcella had been a trusted ally of the Drake family for years, but her loyalty was not without limits. She had her own ambitions, her own plans for the future, and she wasn't about to let anyone, least of all Serena Cruz, jeopardize them. Marcella had always been wary of Alexander's attempts to distance himself from his father's legacy. She saw his growing relationship with Serena as a distraction, a weakness that could be exploited, and so she began to scheme, planting seeds of doubt and mistrust wherever she could. Her first move was subtle but effective. Using her connections in the media, Marcella leaked a story about Serena's father, Miguel Cruz, reigniting the old scandal and casting doubt on his innocence. The article painted Miguel as a disgraced financial consultant who had taken advantage of his clients, including the late Richard Drake. It was a calculated attack designed to discredit Serena and create a rift between her and Alexander. When Serena saw the article, her heart sank. The headline alone was enough to make her stomach churn. The Cruz scandal, revisited, new questions about the man who betrayed the Drakes. The story was filled with half-truths and insinuations, but it was enough to reignite the whispers and judgment she had worked so hard to escape. That evening, Serena confronted Alexander, her voice trembling with anger and frustration. "Did you know about this?" she demanded, holding up her phone with the article displayed on the screen. Alexander's expression darkened as he read the headline. "No," he said firmly. "I had nothing to do with this." "Then who did?" Serena asked, her voice rising. "Because this didn't just come out of nowhere, Alexander. Someone is trying to destroy me." Alexander's jaw tightened, his mind racing. He had a sinking feeling he knew exactly who was behind the leak. "Marcella," he muttered under his breath. "Who?" Serena asked, her eyes narrowing. "Marcella Everett," Alexander explained. "She's the head of PR for Drake Innovations. She's loyal to my father's legacy, and she's never been a fan of the changes I've been trying to make. If she sees you as a threat, she won't hesitate to go after you." Serena's anger turned to disbelief. "So this is what I'm up against? Your father's empire, his allies, his secrets? How am I supposed to fight that, Alexander?" "You're not alone in this," Alexander said, stepping closer to her. "I'll handle Marcella. I'll make sure she doesn't come after you again." But Serena wasn't convinced. "And what happens next time? What happens when someone else decides I'm a threat? I can't keep living like this, Alexander. I can't keep looking over my shoulder, wondering who's going to come after me next." Alexander reached for her hand, his voice soft but resolute. "I know this isn't easy, Serena, but I promise you I won't let anyone hurt you. Not Marcella, not anyone." While Alexander worked to confront Marcella, she was already planning her next move. She knew that the best way to weaken Alexander was to isolate him, to make him question the people closest to him. And so, she began spreading rumors within the company, suggesting that Serena was using Alexander to gain influence and power. The whispers reached Alexander's ears sooner than Marcella had anticipated. At first he dismissed them as baseless gossip, but as the rumors grew louder, he couldn't help but wonder if there was any truth to them. The doubt gnawed at him, creating a rift between him and Serena that Marcella was all too eager to exploit. For Serena, the pressure became unbearable. The media scrutiny, the whispers at work, the tension with Alexander, it all felt like too much. She began to question whether their relationship was worth the pain, whether love could truly survive in a world so consumed by power and betrayal. The breaking point came during a heated argument between Serena and Alexander. "I can't do this anymore," Serena said, her voice breaking. "I can't keep fighting a battle I didn't ask for." Alexander's heart sank. "Serena, please, don't let them win. Don't let them tear us apart." But Serena shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't just about us, Alexander. This is about everything your family represents, everything I've been trying to escape my whole life. I need time. I need space." And with that, she walked away, leaving Alexander standing alone, his heart heavy with regret. The days after Serena walked away were some of the longest Alexander Drake had ever endured. He threw himself into his work, trying to distract himself from the ache in his chest, but nothing could fill the void she had left. For the first time in years, he felt truly powerless, not because of the corporate battles he fought daily, but because he had lost the one person who made him feel alive. Serena, too, was struggling. She had thought that walking away from Alexander would bring her peace, but instead it left her feeling hollow. She missed him, his voice, his touch, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. But the weight of their circumstances, the constant attacks on her character, and the shadow of his family's legacy were too much to bear. She needed time to think, to figure out if their love was worth the pain it brought. Meanwhile, Alexander was determined to make things right. He knew that Marcella Everett was behind the smear campaign against Serena, and he wasn't going to let her get away with it. He called an emergency meeting with the board of Drake Innovations, determined to expose Marcella's schemes and put an end to her influence once and for all. The boardroom was tense as Alexander entered, his expression steely and resolute. Marcella sat at the far end of the table, her usual air of confidence intact. She had been expecting this confrontation, but she wasn't worried. She had spent years building her power within the company, and she was confident that Alexander wouldn't be able to touch her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice calm but firm, "I've called this meeting to address a serious issue within our company. It has come to my attention that one of our own has been using their position to manipulate the media and spread false information for personal gain." Marcella raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "I hope you're not suggesting that I'm involved in any wrongdoing, Alexander." Alexander's gaze hardened. "I'm not suggesting anything, Marcella. I'm stating it as a fact." He turned to the board, presenting a series of documents and emails that detailed Marcella's involvement in the smear campaign against Serena. The evidence was damning, and as Alexander laid it out piece by piece, the room fell silent. Even Marcella's usual composure began to crack as the weight of the accusations bore down on her. "This company was built on innovation and integrity," Alexander continued, his voice rising with conviction. "But actions like these undermine everything we stand for. I won't allow it to continue." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty to Marcella wavering in the face of the evidence. Finally, one of them spoke up. "Marcella, is there any truth to these allegations?" Marcella hesitated, her mind racing as she tried to come up with a defense, but before she could respond, Alexander delivered the final blow. "If you have any doubts about her guilt, I suggest you review the financial records. You'll find that Marcella has been funneling company funds into her own private accounts for years." The room erupted into chaos as the board members demanded answers, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of outrage. Marcella's face turned pale as she realized her carefully constructed empire was crumbling around her. She tried to defend herself, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming, and the board had already made up their minds. By the end of the meeting, Marcella was removed from her position, her reputation in shambles. But for Alexander, the victory was bittersweet. He had protected Serena's name and taken a stand against the corruption within his company, but it didn't change the fact that she was still gone. That evening, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline. He had done everything he could to fight for Serena, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. He wanted to call her, to tell her what he had done, but he was afraid she wouldn't care. Afraid that he had already lost her for good. At the same time, Serena was sitting in her apartment, staring at her phone. She had heard about Marcella's downfall through the industry grapevine, and she knew that Alexander had been the one to take her down. Part of her wanted to reach out to him, to thank him, but she was still unsure if their love could survive the challenges they faced. Finally, After hours of agonizing over her decision, Serena picked up her phone and dialed his number. The line rang once, twice, and then she heard his voice. "Serena," Alexander said, his tone a mix of surprise and relief. "I didn't think I'd hear from you." "I heard about Marcella," Serena said softly. "You didn't have to do that for me." "I didn't do it just for you," Alexander replied. "I did it because it was the right thing to do, but I'd be lying if I said you weren't part of the reason." There was a long pause as Serena tried to find the right words. "I don't know if we can make this work, Alexander. There's so much between us, so much history, so much pain." "I know," Alexander said, "but I also know that I'm not ready to give up on us. Not yet." Serena closed her eyes, her heart aching with the weight of her emotions. She wanted to believe him, to believe that their love could overcome the obstacles in their path. But she also knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to figure out if I can do this." "Ailing Alexandrie." "I'll wait," Alexander said without hesitation. As they ended the call, both of them knew that the fight wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance that, despite everything, their love might still have a future. The days following Serena's tentative call to Alexander were filled with uncertainty. Though they had spoken, the distance between them remained. Serena was still grappling with the weight of their shared history, while Alexander was determined to prove that their love was worth fighting for. But just as they began to find a fragile sense of hope, a new threat emerged, one that would force them to confront their past in ways they never expected. It started with an anonymous email Serena received late one evening. The subject line read, "The truth about Miguel Cruz." Her heart raced as she opened it, her hands trembling. The email contained a single sentence: "Your father was innocent, but the truth could destroy you." Attached was a file labeled confidential. Serena hesitated, her mind spinning. Who had sent this, and why now? Against her better judgment, she opened the file. Inside were documents that appeared to be internal memos from Drake Innovations, dated years ago. They detailed a scheme orchestrated by Richard Drake to frame Miguel Cruz for embezzlement. The evidence was damning, but it also came with a warning. The final page of the file contained a handwritten note: "If you expose this, you'll bring down the Drakes, but you'll also destroy yourself. Choose wisely." Serena sat back, her mind reeling. The documents confirmed what her father had always claimed. He had been framed, but the note made it clear that revealing the truth would come at a cost. If she went public, it could ruin Alexander's family and his company, and it would undoubtedly drag her into a media firestorm. She didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to confront Alexander immediately, but another part of her feared what this revelation would mean for their already fragile relationship. The next day, Serena met with her best friend Maya at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn. Maya had been her rock through every challenge, and Serena knew she could trust her with the truth. After explaining everything, Serena handed Maya the documents. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya studied the papers, her expression grim. "This is huge, Serena. If this gets out, it could clear your father's name. But it could also destroy Alexander's company and his reputation." "I know," Serena said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to hurt him, Maya. But I can't just ignore this. My father deserves justice." Maya reached across the table, taking Serena's hand. "You need to talk to Alexander. He deserves to know the truth before you make any decisions. If he really loves you, he'll stand by you even if it means facing the consequences." Serena nodded, though her heart was heavy with doubt. She knew Maya was right, but the thought of confronting Alexander with this information filled her with dread. That evening, Serena invited Alexander to her apartment. When he arrived, she could see the concern in his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked, sensing her unease. Serena took a deep breath, handing him the file. "I got this yesterday. You need to see it." Alexander opened the file, his expression darkening as he read through the documents. By the time he reached the final page, his jaw was clenched and his hands were shaking. This can't be real," he said, his voice low. "It is," Serena said softly. "Your father framed mine, Alexander. He destroyed my family to protect his company." Alexander sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I had no idea," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "I knew my father wasn't a saint, but this is worse than I ever imagined." Serena sat beside him, her heart aching at the pain in his voice. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "If I go public with this, it could clear my father's name, but it would also destroy everything you've worked for." Alexander looked up at her, his eyes filled with determination. "You have to do what's right, Serena. If this is the truth, then it needs to come out, no matter what it costs me." Serena's breath caught in her throat. "Are you sure? This could ruin you, Alexander." "I don't care," he said firmly. "What my father did was wrong, and your family deserves justice. If I have to rebuild everything from the ground up, so be it, but I won't let you carry this burden alone." The next few days were a blur as Serena and Alexander prepared to go public with the information. They knew the fallout would be immense, but they also knew it was the right thing to do. As the story broke, the media frenzy was even worse than they had anticipated. Headlines screamed about the Drake family scandal, and reporters camped outside Serena's apartment, desperate for a statement. Alexander faced backlash from shareholders and board members, many of whom demanded his resignation. But through it all, Alexander and Serena stood together, their bond stronger than ever. For the first time, Serena felt a sense of peace, knowing that her father's name had been cleared, and Alexander, despite the chaos surrounding him, felt a sense of liberation. He was no longer living in the shadow of his father's sins. One evening, as they sat together in Serena's apartment, Alexander took her hand. "I know this hasn't been easy," he said, "but I don't regret any of it. You've shown me what it means to fight for what's right, even when it's hard." Serena smiled, her heart full, "And you've shown me that love can survive even the darkest of times." As they looked out at the city lights, they knew that their journey was far from over, but for the first time, they felt ready to face whatever came next together. The weeks following the public revelation of Richard Drake's crimes were some of the most challenging Serena and Alexander had ever faced. The media storm was relentless, with every news outlet dissecting the scandal and speculating about the future of Drake Innovations. Shareholders were furious, employees were uncertain, and Alexander's position as CEO hung by a thread. For Serena, the experience was equally overwhelming. While her father's name had finally been cleared, the attention brought back painful memories of the years her family had spent in disgrace. Reporters hounded her for interviews, and social media was flooded with both support and criticism. But through it all, she found strength in Alexander's unwavering support. One morning, as Serena sat in her apartment sipping coffee, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a prominent fashion magazine, offering her a feature story about her journey as a designer and her fight for justice. Serena hesitated. Part of her wanted to share her story, to inspire others who had faced similar struggles. But another part of her feared that reopening old wounds would only prolong the chaos. She decided to call Maya for advice. "What do you think?" Serena asked, explaining the offer. Maya didn't hesitate. "I think you should do it. You've been through so much, Serena, and you've come out stronger. People need to hear your story, not just about your father, but about you. You've built an incredible career despite everything, and that's something to be proud of." Serena smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for her friend. "You're right," she said. "It's time to stop hiding and start owning my story." Meanwhile, Alexander was facing his own battles. The board of Drake Innovations had called an emergency meeting to discuss his future with the company. Many of the members were calling for his resignation. As Alexander entered the sleek conference room, he felt the weight of their judgmental stares. But he refused to back down. He had spent years trying to transform the company into something better, and he wasn't about to let his father's sins undo all of his hard work. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice steady and resolute, "I understand your concerns, and I take full responsibility for the actions of my family. But I want to make one thing clear. Drake Innovations is not defined by the mistakes of the past. We have an opportunity to rebuild, to create a company that values integrity and innovation above all else, and I intend to lead that transformation." The room was silent as Alexander laid out his vision for the future of the company. He proposed a series of reforms, including increased transparency, ethical oversight, and a commitment to social responsibility. By the time he finished, even his harshest critics were nodding in agreement. After a tense vote, the board decided to give Alexander a second chance. It was a hard-won victory, but Alexander knew the real work was just beginning. A few weeks later, Serena's feature story was published, and the response was overwhelming. The article highlighted her journey as a designer, her fight to clear her father's name, and her relationship with Alexander. It painted her as a resilient, talented woman who had overcome incredible odds, and it resonated with readers around the world. For the first time in years, Serena felt a sense of pride and validation. She had spent so long running from her past, but now she was finally ready to embrace it. One evening, Alexander surprised Serena with a visit to her apartment. He was carrying a small box, his expression nervous but hopeful. "What's this?" Serena asked, eyeing the box curiously. Alexander smiled, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "Open it." Inside was a simple but elegant key. Serena looked up at him, confused. "What is this for?" "It's for us," Alexander said. "I found a new place, where we can start fresh. No ghosts from the past, no reminders of everything we've been through. Just a home for us to build a future together." Serena's heart swelled with emotion. "Alexander, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said, taking her hands in his. "Say you'll take this next step with me. I know we've been through hell, but I believe in us, Serena. I believe we can build something beautiful together." Tears filled Serena's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes. I'll take this step with you." The months that followed were a time of healing and growth. Alexander worked tirelessly to rebuild Drake Innovations, transforming it into a company that reflected his values. Serena continued to thrive in her career, launching a new collection inspired by her journey of resilience and love. Together, they found a sense of peace and happiness that had once seemed impossible. Their new home became a sanctuary, a place where they could dream about the future without the weight of the past holding them back. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their new home, watching the sun set over the city, Alexander turned to Serena. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. Serena smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "All the time," she said, "and I wouldn't change a thing. Every challenge, every heartbreak, it all led us here." Alexander kissed her forehead, his heart full. "Here's to new beginnings," he said softly. "To new beginnings," Serena echoed, her voice filled with hope. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, they knew that their story was far from over. But for the first time, they felt ready to face whatever came next, together.